guys, and welcome to today's video. Today is my first 2020 review. Now, I know I've got some other reviews coming, but this is the first one where it's a product of 2020. Like, yay! It also turns out my first 2020 review is also a Kill It With Fire review. So, I don't know. Should I be happy? Should I not be happy? I'm very confused. I don't know how to feel about this, but I know that, yeah, I did not enjoy this. Obviously, you can see from the title. Today, I'm talking about Dracula on Netflix. Oh man, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. Let's just get straight into the actual review. Dracula is a television series developed by Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat based on the novel of the same name by Bram Stoker. Season 1 was broadcast and released on BBC One and Netflix in January of 2020 and follows Dracula from his origins in Eastern Europe to his battles with Van Helsing and beyond. I'm not gonna beat around the bush, I'm just gonna come out and say that this series was utter garbage. Every time I think of it, I start getting upset again. I love vampires, and I especially love Dracula. The film Bram Stoker's Dracula is one of my favorite films of all time. I've had a poster of it hanging in my room for almost a decade now. I will watch practically any incarnation of the character and see what new elements writers bring to the table. I like seeing how other writers will breathe fresh life into vampires as mythological characters. This show certainly takes a modern approach to the Dracula tale, but not to the story or the character's benefit. This series has taken one of the most iconic gothic characters of the last century plus a couple of decades and watered his character and mythology down to insignificant psychobabble bullshit. Comparatively, I would rather sit through Dracula 2000 again and again than ever watch this again. Over the course of 3 episodes, nothing is revealed about Dracula's origins. His age is established, but his vampiric nature is not. Stories often depict Dracula as the first vampire in creation. In this series, he is not. He's just the most successful and famous. Mostly because every time he meets someone, his introduction to them is, "I am Count Dracula, I am a vampire," demonstrating he doesn't care about anonymity and loves to show off the fact he is a monster who likes to eat people. His constant boasting and parading around like a peacock with its feathers out gets irritating extremely fast. The character is more in love with himself than any Dracula in history, which the 3rd episode suggests was nothing more than false bravado, but had you been watching the show, you would see it as quite sincere. This series describes vampirism as nothing more than a disease that some are unfortunate enough to contract and become infected. While we know how Dracula's victims contract it, we are never told how the many other victims around the world have contracted the same disease. At best, we can assume from other vampires, since the series tells us Dracula is not the first or the only one. The show tells us Dracula has just adapted to his disease and has learned to use it to his benefit, which is very poor writing in my opinion. It's an explanation that doesn't actually explain anything. As the episodes move along, we see Van Helsing attempting to understand why Dracula has specific weaknesses and what about them makes them a weakness. In the end, we learn that most of Dracula's weaknesses are all in his head. The cross can't hurt him, it only does because he believes it does. Sunlight cannot harm him, it only hurts because he believes it can. Basically, this historical character is just a guy who is so ashamed of himself and so afraid of death that it prevents him from dying. Go ahead and try and rationalize this. What the show is saying is all of Dracula's weaknesses are psychosomatic. What an absolute pitiful revelation. One might say that's very deep and profound, but I call that a cop-out. 3 episodes of searching for the hidden meaning to the monster's nature to find there isn't any. Oh, and we still have no idea what causes vampirism, by the way. They never did reveal that. Dracula is a sad, pathetic excuse for a man who uses people as food and playthings, experimenting on them and treating them like toys until he gets bored. While they kept many elements of the Dracula character the same, they did take many liberties. Some were good, others not so much. While I enjoy them saying memories live in the blood and by drinking someone's blood you can adopt their memories and their personalities, even their accents, they did this in the Vampire Diaries, so it's not that new. Okay, well the memories, they did that, not the rest, because that would be stupid, which this was. Dracula is introduced as a withering old man with the worst Transylvanian accent I have ever heard. His accent sounded far more like Claes Bang doing a terrible Janosch from Ghostbusters 2 impersonation. For the first 20 minutes, I half expected him to cry for his Vigo. In fact, he looked like a cross between Vigo and the grandfather in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, only with really bad prosthetics. Even the acrylic nails were terrible. They were so raised off the nail bed, they didn't remotely pass for real. Nail techs around the world would be gasping in horror at the very sight of those ugly looking things. This incarnation of Dracula also appears to be gay, which I honestly don't mind. This is certainly different, not a necessary change, but their approach was subtle and tasteful and actually worked with the character's personality. Vampires throughout history have been used and considered as sex symbols, speaking to repressed desires and being free of human restraint and sin. They've always been seductive in nature and are often written as erotic for apparent reasons. I've always seen most vampires as sexually ambiguous by nature, as feeding is their pleasure and their victims' genders do not matter, so anyone and everyone are up for grabs, and seduction is just part of the lure to attract prey. In the case of this show, that assessment still stands, but Dracula appears to take far more of a liking to the men around him. With women such as the Countess, he seduces them merely as a means to an end to better draw in his meal and ensure they taste their best. But with characters such as Jonathan Harker or Lord Ruthven, Dracula was not quick to kill them. He liked to touch and caress and frankly flirt his little vampire ass off. He was hitting on these gentlemen and hitting on them hard. When feeding on Harker, the act appeared quite sexual in nature, much the same as Ruthven. These things led me to believe Dracula might just bat for the other team, but since he does not seek love or sex and only cares for his next meal, the way the show had to depict this would have had to be in the fine details. This I felt they accomplished quite brilliantly. While the series ends with Van Helsing and Dracula locked in a naked embrace in a symbolic depiction, this did not feel sexual at all. There was never a sexual attraction between these two characters. They weren't even enemies at the root of it. I should go back a bit to better explain that. This series depicts Van Helsing as a woman, and not just any woman, but a nun who studies the occult, and Dracula in her quest to find God. This is indeed a unique take, but not at all that new, as there is a TV series called Van Helsing that depicts Van Helsing's current descendant as a woman, but the nun part is a clever touch. We also see a descendant of her bloodline, which makes absolutely no sense. We have an organization formed by Mina Harker to hunt Dracula. She is explained to have sought out Sister Agatha Van Helsing's family, who joined her in their noble quest to carry on Van Helsing's work. If you think this makes no sense, you would be correct. Mina wanting revenge for the death of her beloved, that makes sense. Enlisting the aid of the family of a woman who severed ties with her family to become a nun because that would have been protocol back then does not make sense. But here we are, Dracula in modern days going toe-to-toe with Van Helsing's great-great-great-grandniece who is identical to her. Okay, I mean, if you say so. Regardless of incarnation, Van Helsing is fascinated with studying Dracula, and Dracula is thrilled to show off and have someone to talk to about his life and actually get to know him. It's a strange friendship, but there is no hate nor love between the two. They appear as intellectual equals who have formed mutual respect with each other. So their final depiction together I do not believe to be one of love, but more a symbolism of Dracula letting his guard down and being vulnerable for the first time. As it is during this moment, Dracula is committing suicide. He is committing suicide by drinking Van Helsing's blood. As she is dying of cancer, her blood is poison to him. He gives her a painless death and ends her pain and his own. All's well that ends well. One might still say perhaps Dracula is bi, or more likely pansexual if you think about it, but I still think he bats for the guys. Dracula loves to take on pet projects which he calls his brides, but his brides have been both male and female, showing that word is nothing more than a meaningless subject title. Much of the dialogue in this series feels modern, even when in 19th century settings. The costumes don't always feel suited to the time period and do often look just like costumes. Dracula himself often looks like he's going to a lavish Halloween party. The series takes many liberties with 19th century etiquette, depicting things or characters that wouldn't occur in certain places and times. I understand going for a modern adaptation, but trying to modernize the 19th century doesn't make much sense. Many characters from the book appear in the series, even the lovely Lucy, but Lucy is not a friend of Mina. Lucy is now a 22-year-old bar-hopping socialite obsessed with her looks, pissing in alleys and screwing every guy who shows her attention. Classy. We have her modern suitors, Dr. Seward and Quincy, but this time around no Lord Arthur Homewood, whom in the book she is to wed. In fact, it is this version that sees Lucy engaged to Quincy, not that either of them seems to care, and why this was even included at all I will not understand, as it did nothing for the story, since it was all out of context with surrounding events. Lucy, however, does become one of Dracula's brides, but again, while there is seduction, it is Lucy who seduces Dracula and not the other way around. Lucy willingly lets him bite her repeatedly, showing herself to be quite masochistic. Dracula is fascinated by Lucy, not because he is attracted to her, but because, as the final episode tells us, he is fascinated by her obsession and lack of fear when it comes to death, a subject of which he has an entirely different perspective. Looking back, the final episode was indeed the worst. The character of Lucy was merely included as a drawn-out way to explain Dracula's mythology, which was not at all logical, so the fact the story took this very elaborate approach for nothing just ended up as nothing more than a waste of time. While the character of Agatha Van Helsing was an intriguing one and their back and forth was at times entertaining, overall, the new incarnation of these characters was beyond ridiculous. This series is classified as a drama horror. A drama it is indeed, but a horror perhaps only in the quality of writing. While there were some nuggets of quality scattered throughout the 3 episodes, there was ultimately no real substance and certainly no quality to this. It was a discombobulated story that was trying to be edgy and fresh, and in trying to do so, they did the opposite. They stuck to a great deal of the source material but made changes that already exist in other shows and films, and then forgot to actually explain the origin of the titular character, which was a big chunk of the synopsis. There are a great many plot holes, especially in the final episode, but the fact a show about understanding Dracula never gave us anything to understand is a failure in my opinion. I'm stunned this has gotten rave reviews because for me, this is one of the worst adaptations of not just the Dracula character, but of the book itself, and I very much regret having watched it. I gotta say, even with them dealing with Dracula's mythology, I pointed out so much that was wrong, but the fact that there's an organization that's, created to hunt and kill Dracula, and when they finally find him, they don't attempt to catch him or kill him, they just let him be, and then they're kind of constantly doing things to preserve him instead of just fucking killing him, so in the meantime he's going around killing other people. It's like, did you forget the whole reason you were created? And on top of that, you see it back in the other episodes before we get to episode 3. I can't remember if it was episode 1 or 2, but they say Dracula cannot drink the blood of the dead. It's poison to him. So it's like, okay, you know this one thing, so why not fucking just give him dead blood somehow? Inject him if you must. We even see that in the 3rd episode with Zoe Van Helsing. So Agatha Van Helsing's a descendant, and she's dying of cancer, and he bites her, and he's immediately throwing up, and he's in pain because she has cancer, so she's dying. So technically, it's dead blood, so he can't drink it. And she knew that. She's even going, oh yeah, you can't drink it because blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, you're standing this far from him. You've got a syringe. You could have filled it with your own blood, injected it into his heart or something, and nope. Nothing. Nada. Wonderful. And in the end, he commits suicide by drinking dead blood. So we've just established, if you wanted to kill him, that's all you had to do. Give him dead blood somehow. That would not have been that fucking hard in the scheme of things. It was just frustrating. Like I said, I love Dracula. I love Bram Stoker's Dracula. I love vampires as mythological creatures, and I just hated their approach to this. Everything starting it off, I'm just like, what the fuck? And then by the end of it, I'm like, that's what you did? So, yeah, I was really surprised when I jumped onto Wikipedia and IMDb and I'm seeing all these rave reviews and these high ratings and scores, and I'm just going, what? So I guess I'm in the minority on this one. That's okay. I'm accustomed to that. But yeah, I did not remotely like this miniseries, and I mean, there is kind of room for a second season because they did establish that Dracula is not the first or the only vampire, so they technically could go into that, but then why would you call it Dracula? So I don't know, maybe they won't. It's very hard to determine because they do crazy things, so who knows what they'll do. But anyway, if you have seen the new Netflix series, 3 episodes on Netflix, which I just said, each episode I think goes for about, I guess, an hour and a half. So if you have the time to dedicate and you feel like watching it, go and check it out. If you already had, comment down below and tell me what you thought of it. I'm gonna go somewhere where I don't have to think about this thing that I watched. So anyway, that's it for today. Thank you as always to my fabulous, fantastic patrons, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!